record to the cloud. Yes. It's now recording. Okay. So, hello everyone. Here we are again. Welcome to the third Fiction Fix Online. And this event is being live streamed to my timeline, I believe, for those of you who aren't yet members of our Facebook group, and to the Finger on the Pulse, which is the Facebook group for Fiction Fix Live and Fiction Fix Online. And that's for readers as well as people who just pop in to listen. And the Zoom video will be posted afterwards on YouTube on my Helen Claire Gould channel. And so please do subscribe and please point all your friends towards it. Thank you very much. So at our Fiction Fix Live events, there's always a books table, but we can't do that with Fiction Fix Online. But authors, please, if you have a book already, post your details in the chat. And if you have a website, do include it and a link to the ebook or seller for the print version. And we also need to know the price of each edition and an ISBN or a SIN if you have it, or any other thing that any other publisher might have. So this can be done at the end, and I will post it with the video or in the comments below it. Okay, so now we're going to start off with Colin sharing the third instalment of his new fantasy series with you. So please make some noise for Colin Abrecht with Theo.
Thank you, everyone. Just one little apology before we go any further. I apologize for the sun that's behind my shoulder. It's just the living room light and it's the way it's reflecting. Okay, so in the first sections of this, we met our hero, Theo Mistmoon, who is on a mission to take a message to another gypsy encampment about 2 days' march from his own site. The second installment, he met an elf who was being chased by a huge, nasty-looking spider, and the two of them battled it and finally defeated the spider, and then they rest for the night. So we pick up at night. The night passed uneventfully, with Theo taking first watch to allow Rio to rest for longer. In the morning, they breakfasted on the small amount of trail rations Rio had brought with him. The nuts, berries, and strips of dried meat were all that was left of the elf's camping equipment. "We could find the place where the spider attacked you and pick up your gear from there," suggested Theo. "Would that be on the line of travel back to your own clan?" "That would be a good start," agreed Rio. "I'm not much of a tracker, but I must have made a real mess when I ran from the spider. My route should be easy to follow." They found the site where they had fought the spider and carefully skirted the beast's body before plunging into the bushes from which Rio had emerged. Following his panicked flight was easy. Twigs were broken, undergrowth trampled, and they found 2 places where Rio had fallen, recovering his small dagger from the bush. As they walked, something occurred to Rio. Won't you be late to deliver your message?" he asked. "I was given 2 or 3 days to reach Mandel's band, so helping you out is no real delay. I might need to push myself a bit on the 3rd day, though. I'm sure my people can help, Theo." Rio's camping gear was scattered around a small clearing. Between them, they recovered his bedding, backpack, and a short bow and a dozen arrows. Of his original food supply, nothing was found. Presumably, it had been eaten by scavengers. Rio tested his bow, shooting one of his arrows into a tree stump, which, to Theo's judgment, was less than 4 inches across. "Excellent shot," Theo said. "It's fortunate it was not damaged by the animals who scavenged for food. With this, I might be able to bring down a wood pigeon or a rabbit," returned Rio. "How far is your camp from here?" asked Theo. Rio considered this. The condition of the wager was that I travel at least a day's march from our camp. When the spider found me, I fled, so I'm unsure how far it is. By my reckoning, though," he added brightly, "the camp is in that direction." The elf gestured a roughly southerly direction. "Then let's get moving," said Theo. "The last thing we want is more spiders on our trail." "I should keep this ready, just in case," replied Rio, knocking an arrow to his bow. Theo took an instant to look over the bow. The wood was stained red and lighter oranges showed the direction of the grain. The hand grip was tied in soft leather and bone marked the tips of the bow stave. It was a fine piece of work, judged Theo, but he was no expert archer. He said so to Rio. Rio replied, I'm training to be an archer for Clan Diatheru. It will be my role to stand sentry, make sure no creature prowls too close and kill anything that does. He pointed the bow menacingly at Theo, who stepped back with his hands raised. So it's the tool of your trade? Theo asked as calmly as he could manage. Rio might just be playing games with him, but one slip could put an arrow through Theo's heart. Rio relaxed the pull on his bow. Yes, he said brightly, I suppose you could call it that, though for us it's something more than that. I made this bow, you see, and will carry it with me throughout my training. It's certainly a work of great skill, replied Theo, relaxed now that the bow was no longer pointing at him. I wish I could have made my own tools. He unlimbered his lute from his case on his back. This is mine, though I don't know exactly who made it. My mother said it came for a visit to a city years ago, before I was even born. He strummed the lute for a few seconds and let the notes drift away through the forest. Rio applauded, then his eyes fell to the sword on Theo's hip. And that? I don't think your trade really involves swordplay, Theo. This? Theo unsheathed the sword and handed it hilt first to his friend. It was my father's. He left it when he left us. Theo ended on a mumble. Left? Dead? Inquired Rio, suddenly concerned for Theo's loss. No, not dead, just gone. He left one night when I was still young. I mean to find him and find out why he left, he finished with determination in his face. My sympathies, friend Theo. I hope you will find what you're looking for and that it does not need this, he handed back the sword to Rio, to come to some agreement with the man. Theo sheathed the sword. I hope so too, Rio. They walked further through the forest, occasionally spotting signs of Rio's original journey, a broken twig, scuff marks in the grass, even footprints in the soil. As he had admitted, he was no tracker, nor was he a scout. Rio stated that the elves had their own scouts, one of whom could be walking beside them now, and they would never know unless he or she revealed themselves. Theo was reminded of the ghost stories that had frightened him as a child, and wondered just how much was fact and how much fantasy. It was around noon when they heard horns blowing in the distance. The blasts were unlike anything Theo had heard from Manish instruments, and he mentioned this to Rio. The elf replied, That is because they are elven horns. My people are looking for me. Then he looked crestfallen. I am in a world of trouble now. There you go. Thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Colin is also our techie guy, so many thanks to him for all his contributions in that department. And obviously, you know, we are happy to share our appreciation for you. Right, so now this afternoon we've got several new readers for you, plus one reader who's read once before, but a while ago. So next up is new reader Martin, who has various novels published independently, I believe, and has recently self-published another novel in his Judd Stone series. So please, a nice warm welcome to Martin Tracy, who is reading an extract from his thriller, Luna.
Thank you very much, Helen. Hope I can live up to the grand entrance there, but yeah. Third installment of the...
show that.
Okay,
yeah.
Third. Well, this is what I'm going to be reading from.
Yeah.
Third installment of the Judd Stone series, as you said. 3 short chapters. First 2 opening chapters, which should just basically set the scene of what the book's about. Then I'll jump to chapter 9, and that should leave it in a good place, I think, for people to want more, hopefully.
Okay. I did actually have a quick look, and I think your first chapter's about that.
Yeah,
long,
yeah, it's one page, that's it. Yep, yep. Bit of a trademark of mine, short chapters.
Yeah.
So, and you're going to have to put up with it with Birmingham accent, by the way.
Oh,
But
we
then,
don't mind that. The thing is, we've been with the live version, we've been, you know, Peterborough and the surrounding areas. Hence Louise has read before, but basically we can have people from anywhere now.
yeah,
We're talking to a Frenchman to see if he would like to read at some
brilliant.
point. And he
Well, the
said,
books-
"Oh, but I've got this dreadful French accent." And I said, "I'm sure, I think you'll find people are quite happy to, you know, to hear you, and they will
Yeah.
find it very endearing because English people do like to hear a French accent, you know."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's set in Birmingham anyway. So
I'm also a Brummie, so
Sorry.
I'm also a Brummie, so
Are you?
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
born and bred.
Ah,
Excellent.
fab.
Right, I shall pick up offline with you about that, Anders. So that'll be good. Anyway, I better make a start, hadn't I? Right, so chapter 1, fixing a hole.
Yeah.
The construction worker fell backwards in shock and scurried across the dusty floor like a frightened squirrel might when an unfamiliar presence is upon them. He swiftly removed his hard hat and protective goggles, illustrating the magnitude of what his eyes had seemingly just witnessed. However, the protective part of his brain had been destined to kick in at this point, wired to question anything that defied normality. Even so, he quickly came to realise that his eyes had not deceived him. Kane had worked on many building developments over the years, and it was commonplace in his profession to joke with his colleagues about discovering such things, never really expecting the scenario to come true. Yet, now it had happened. During the renovation of Great Bar Hall, Kane had discovered the remains of a human skeleton. Ooh. Chapter 2, I don't want to spoil the party. Happy birthday once again, Double C. Crystal playfully slapped at Judd's arm. I told you never to call me that. I'm just trying to make you sound cool, Crystal, you know, give you a bit more street cred. After all, that's yet another year you've gone and notched up since you were born, isn't it? Are you looking for another slap, Judd Stone? And this time it'll come twice as hard. Okay, Mrs. Chamberlain, it is. Now you're making me sound like a school headmistress. Crystal will be just fine. Thank you very much. Judd had taken to calling Crystal Chamberlain, the wife of his best friend William, by the nickname of Double C, in a playful reflection of her initials since their marriage in Las Vegas. In actual fact, it had been a double wedding, with Judd committing himself to Brooke at the exact same Elvis-themed ceremony. This act of double commitment highlighted the deep friendship that each couple held for one another. Crazy weddings had taken place during a tour of pop star sensation Phoenix. Judd had been employed as her bodyguard at the time. Sharing the life of a bona fide pop star who liked to party harder than hard made it easy for the four friends to get caught up in the razzmatazz of it all, especially in Vegas. Not that either couple had any regrets at getting hitched since returning to a more, shall we say, regular lifestyle. These days, Judd was strictly a private investigator once again, as sadly his days of being a bodyguard to Phoenix had come to an end. Phoenix had been certified dead at the age of just 27, albeit amongst the usual conspiracy-fueled circumstances of an artist passing so young. Nevertheless, and regardless of what had really happened to the talented songstress, Judd found himself surplus to requirements for protecting a pop star who was either dead or who wanted the world to believe she was dead. In actual fact, as wonderful an experience as it had undoubtedly been, Judd didn't like to talk about his time rubbing shoulders with one of the biggest ever stars on the planet. The media sensed he had answers, but whether he did or he didn't, he at least could always protect the Phoenix that he knew and her reputation, even if he could no longer physically protect her. In truth, the offers of book deals, tabloid serials, and taking part in documentaries were at last beginning to dry up. The industry must have finally started to get the message. Judd Stone's stubbornness may have prevented his bank account from growing, but at least his integrity and loyalty to Phoenix remained intact. He would always view the time he had spent protecting her as a privilege. There were still times when he sorely missed her. Today, the four friends who had shared that special wedding ceremony in sunny Las Vegas were now stepping over in overcast Birmingham, England, not long after eating a delicious meal at one of Crystal's favourite canal side restaurants, situated between the mailbox and Gas Street Basin. After all, it had been her birthday, so it was only right that she should have chosen the venue. In spite of his multiple sclerosis, William had been determined to walk along Birmingham's canals beside the woman he loved on her birthday, supported by walking sticks as opposed to relying on his wheelchair. Unfortunately, his noble act of independence had contributed significantly as to why he had fallen into the water of the canal once the shots had been fired. Not before he had handed Brooke a small jiffy bag, whilst Crystal and Judd had been engaged in their banter nearby. "What's this?" she had inquired. "Just something you may need to give to your husband someday when I'm no longer around." "Don't talk like that, William. You'll be around for years to come yet." During that conversation, Brooke could never have guessed how poignant her words would become. William smiled. "Maybe, but let's just call it a bit of insurance just in case, eh, Brooke?" But I don't understand." "Shh, I don't have the time or inclination to discuss it right now. Today is a day for celebration. Just trust me. It makes sense if you have it for safekeeping. I can't give it to lover boy Judd. He'd lose his head if it wasn't screwed on." "Okay, thanks, I think." Brooke could see that William seemed worried about something, but the wink of his eye and forced smile of reassurance had underlined that it was not the time to pry. Still curious, Brooke placed a small package into her handbag. Amidst the panicked screams of visitors to the canals, Judd immediately scanned the area in a desperate attempt to locate the source of the gunshots. His eyes fell onto a figure sitting astride a motorcycle. The helmet was unusual, with a flame emblazoned down either side of its shell, and frustratingly, it covered the facial features of the shooter. Nevertheless, Judd somehow connected with the hidden, cold stare that lay behind the visor before another round of shots were fired, which connected first Crystal and then Brooke. In that split second, Judd couldn't decide whether to run to the aid of his wife or to charge headfirst at the gunman. The decision was taken from him as he felt a sharp pain into his stomach. Judd knew it was serious as he found himself hopelessly rooted to the spot and watched the blood spread across the lower area of his shirt. Not long after he passed out, the motorcyclist spun around in the blink of an eye and raced up the ramp out of Gas Street Basin towards his escape into Broad Street. We'll jump on slightly a little bit more to chapter 9 now.
Judd is fully recovered by this time.
Yeah, obviously I'll give the game away there. They just recovered. But that's the only spoiler you're going to get. So chapter 9, tell me what you see. "Dr. Keeley, thank you for agreeing to meet me," said Judd, shaking the woman's hand. Dr. Harriet Keeley was the head of genetic analysis at the University of Leicester. She was the perfect person for Judd to speak to next about the discovered remains, for it was Dr. Keeley who had headed up the team that had identified the bones of King Richard III. The king had remarkably been discovered in a city of Leicester car park in 2012, many centuries after its unknown burial. The incredible find caused a considerable amount of global attention and produced a distinct spike in English historical interest. Now, Dr. Keeley had agreed to work on the skeleton that had been found in Great Bar Hall. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Stone. Please follow me." Dr. Keeley led Judd into a nearby forensics room. He knew he was going to see a skeleton today, but nevertheless, he was still slightly taken aback when the collection of bones quickly appeared upon his line of sight as he walked through the door. "So that's her. That's her, the skeleton that was discovered in Great Bar Hall. I doubt she'll attract the interest of a Plantagenet king," I can never say that word, "but nevertheless, the timing of her death is very interesting in a historical sense. Even though the police aren't interested in what happened to her, we still feel a sense of duty to try and tell her story so that she can somehow rest in peace." "So have you been able to establish anything of interest yet?" inquired Judd. "It's still early days in our assessment, but yes, we have already discovered some very interesting facts about these bones. Come, let me show you." Dr. Keeley guided Judd closer to the bones. "I wasn't expecting hair to be on the skull," said Judd. "Hair contains keratin but no water. Therefore, it doesn't decompose in the same way as flesh does. Do you share your bathroom with a lady, Mr. Stone?" Judd felt his stomach churn as he thought of Brooke lying in her hospital bed with all those tubes coming out of her, but decided not to elaborate in the circumstances for Dr. Keeley's benefit. "Yes, I do." "No doubt then you felt consistent frustration at the amount of hair that becomes trapped in the plug hole of the shower. Human hair is a resilient little bugger, and it's not something even the Grim Reaper can claim." "I see. I expected the smell to. Not from a skeleton, Mr. Stone. Once the flesh and organs have decomposed, there is no real sense, but believe me, rotting flesh is not something you'd want to smell. Actually, Doctor, unfortunately from past experience in my line of work, I do know what the smell of rotting flesh is like. You're right, though, it's definitely not pleasant." "Certainly isn't. Anyway, Mr. Stone, I'd like to show you these unusual markings in the cheekbones." Dr. Keeley nonchalantly lifted the skull and rotated it until the light could reveal some definite incisions on the bone. "Is that unusual?" asked Judd. "Well, this is a type of marking usually caused by an animal. The markings, as you can see, are in the shape of a V, and such markings are very consistent with a dog bite or even bites from a wild animal, perhaps. There are similar markings on the ribs too. So you think she could have been killed by an animal? Asked Judd. Dr. Keeley carefully replaced her skull before answering. When bodies are left in the outdoors, they are often scavenged upon by any number of animals in the vicinity. Not a pleasant thought, I know, but a fact nonetheless. However, this young lady was found concealed in the construction of a building, as I understand. Therefore, scavengers would have been unable to reach her. So in conclusion, Mr. Stone, yes, it is possible that she was killed by an animal, even perhaps a domestic dog. What is curious is why she became buried in the walls of an old house after her killing. Perhaps it was to hide the fact that a loving family dog could have done such a thing. Possibly, although history tells us that our English ancestors weren't quite the animal lovers that we are today. This makes me doubt that someone would have covered the actions of an animal in order to save that animal's skin, so to speak. Surely if a dog had done this, it would have been in a state beyond control anyway, and no doubt would have needed destroying. I'm convinced that there would have been no hesitation by the owners in such circumstances. It's all very strange and puzzling at the moment. I once read that a dog ate part of its dead owner who had died from natural causes. Because it had been left in the flat with them for several weeks and discovered it simply needed to eat to survive. It's happened more than once, Mr. Stone. I have worked on such cases myself. Another theory could be that our victim here had been an alcoholic and fell into a deep sleep or even slipped into a coma for some reason. Believe it or not, the most loving of dogs will bite their owners in an attempt to arouse them. Perhaps the dog even did this on discovering their body, and then our deceased victim was buried in the walls after the dog's intervention. So let me get this clear in my head, if you don't mind, Doctor. It's possible that the dog could have simply been exposed to the freshly killed body and then it sunk its teeth into it before being shooed away. Yes. And then our killer went on to continue the deception by placing the body in the wall. It's possible. Oh boy. We should recognise that in some rare cases, a dog will turn on its owner to establish his or her hierarchical position. But that brings us back to the question of what human at that time would take the time and effort to cover the actions of a dog. Judd searched his brain as he stared at the skull, which no longer held one. Then he had an outlandish realisation and wondered if he should dare to share it with Dr. Keeley. He decided at this stage he wouldn't for fear of being ridiculed. He understood that the discovery of the skeleton had already cast a cloud over the reputation of the Lunar Society, and now his imagination began to build on that cloud. Often, conspiracy theories suggest that a gathering of brilliant minds might be linked in parallel to something far more sinister, such as a satanic cult or the Illuminati. Judd was finding it difficult to suppress his excitement as the cogs of his mind whirred. Illuminati, born out of the era of enlightenment, and now widely believed, albeit secretly, to control the media, political system, and even the entertainment business. The Lunar Society, so called because they followed the light of the full moon due to the absence of street lighting at that time. Was there a connection between these two camps? But Judd was even more enthusiastic as he thought about another potentially incredible and bizarre twist in the discovery of this skeleton at Great Bar Hall. The bones of the victim had bite marks upon them, presenting the likelihood that a dog-like beast had played a part in the killing. It's quite possible that the savage attack may well have been executed under the light of a full moon. The killing had certainly seemed to have occurred on the Lunar Society territory. Therefore, could it be possible that this attack had been the work of a werewolf? Thank you for listening.
Oh, wow. There is a line of reasoning.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so.
I'm hearing lots of place names that I'm familiar with. So.
Oh, really?
Yes, Broad Street, for instance. I used to walk the length of it every single day.
Yeah.
To work, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you.
Pleasure,
Right.
thank you.
Okay, well, that's great, you know. So now we're going to flip the mood around. And so the next person who's going to read is Louise, and she writes children's stories in narrative poem form. So will you please welcome back Louise Hallion with 2 short story poems for children, Happy Hill and Chips.
Hi, Louise.
Hello.
Right.
Which would you like me to read first?
Well, whichever. Just tell us which one it is, though.
Okay. I shall read Chips first because it's on the top of the pile.
All right.
Can you tell me if you can hear me?
Yes,
All right.
fabulous.
Okay. Okay, so this one is called Chips. There once lived a cat. His name was Chips, and he wanted to be a spy. So he twizzled his whiskers into a marvellous moustache and waved all his old friends goodbye. The snake in the grass smirked and laughed. The blue jay and jackdaw did too. The giraffe scoffed and giggled, the worm turned and wriggled, and the chimp laughed so much he turned blue. You can't be a spy, you're only a puss, and you look very silly in that hat. But Chips didn't mind who was unkind. I'm going to be a spy, and that's that. It wasn't too long before Chips heard a cry and a very worrisome wail. Chips, I need help, said a fox with a yelp and a swish of his bushy red tail. Oh my, Mr. Fox, why so small? I swear you're getting thinner and thinner. I am, the fox cried. I'm all empty inside. Someone keeps eating my dinner. Eating your dinner? How very odd. I wonder who on earth it could be. I'll hide in the grass and use my spyglass, and I'll catch the food thief before tea. But after an hour, Chips fell asleep, and he snored and slept soundly all day. And while he was sleeping, the food thief came creeping and stole Fox's dinner away. Oh no, the fox sobbed, it's happened again. Oh Chips, what shall we do? If I don't eat some dinner, I'll get even thinner and I'll have to eat my own poo. The next night was chilly, but Chips stayed awake, playing football with a ginormous conker. But he got a huge fright and jumped high as a kite when he saw a white-whiskered monster. Mr. Fox, I found the food thief. It's huge and looks very scary. It's got very sharp claws and monstrous paws, and its feet are horrid and hairy. Oh, Chips, you must stop him. There's no time to waste. You might only have one chance. And although Chips was wary of anything scary, he crept through the whispering grass. He followed his nose, and to his great surprise, the monster was standing right there. The monster laughed. So you found me at last. Catch me now if you dare. The monster ran off with a giggle and a grunt, but Chips wasn't scared anymore. He ran fast as he could through the big ghostly wood until his poor little feet were quite sore. But the monster grew tired, so Chips took his chance and launched a great spy attack. With a growl and a powl, a hiss and a meow, he pounced for the monster's big back. The monster laughed loudly and stuck out his tongue and punched the air with his paws. But Chips was quick, and with a high ninja kick, the monster fell to the floor. Mr. Fox, I've caught the food thief. I am a good spy after all. But when Fox appeared, he scoffed and he sneered, for the monster wasn't big, but quite small. That's not a monster, it's a mouse, the fox mocked. Your spyglass made him look bigger. Oh yes, Chips laughed, how very daft. But tonight you can eat your own dinner. Hang on, I'm finishing it. Hang on, there's a couple more verses, sorry.
Oh, right. Okay.
So the fox set a table with his knife and fork and a plate as big as a pie. Then he got dressed in his smart Sunday best, a dinner jacket and a fancy bow tie. Chips, will you join me? Asked the villainous fox. You can sit on this chair next to me. And with a lick of his lips, the fox pounced on Chips and ate him all up for his tea. And the little mouse made a delicious dessert. The end. Maybe I should finish it where you clapped the first time. Okay, so the second one is called Happy Hill, but it's a lot shorter. Okay. In a little town called Grumpsville, grumpy animals roam, grumbling gorillas and very cross cats, and a herd of cows that moan. One day the cats and some miserable rats, a deer and a sad bandicoot, were plodding around with a flock of lost lambs until they heard a whisper and hoot. Do you want to know a secret? Whispered a jolly brown owl. I've found happiness. Do you want to know how? I suppose so, grouched the gorillas. Oh, yes, please, the lambs cried. Climb Happy Hill, said the owl, and it's on the other side. But Happy Hill is too high, the gorillas all grumbled. And it's really hard to climb, all the miserable rats mumbled. Well, I think we should try, said a serious slug. I'd love to be happy and give you all a big hug. So the cats used a spoon to catapult a raccoon, a kitten and a pitiful pup. But the spoon wouldn't do, it snapped clean in two before they were halfway up. So a chimp blew a bubble as big as a balloon and floated up into the sky. But the bubble popped, so he had to stop, for a chimp is a chimp and can't fly. Oh, what shall we do? Worried a croc, sad and snappy. If we can't climb the hill, we'll never be happy. I have an idea, sighed a bored basset hound. If we can't climb the hill, why don't we go round? So the miserable animals set off one by one, and to their big surprise, they had lots of fun. For the cats chased the birds and played tiggy with a duck, and the cows ran a race with the croc and the pup. The chimp did some cartwheels and stood on his head, and the gorillas stopped grumbling and chuckled instead. All of the animals knew something had changed, for they felt a new feeling that was squiggly and strange. They didn't feel sad, grumpy or snappy. They felt all warm, giggly and happy. Twit-a-woo, called the jolly brown owl. You've all found happiness. I knew you'd know how. Yes, giggled the animals, it was easy to find. It wasn't round the hill, but in our hearts all the time.
Oh,
Oh, let's hear it for Louise there. That's great. Okay, so that's fabulous. And that was Happy Hill and Chips, but not in that order. Reverse order. Okay, so now then, she couldn't make it last time, but she's made it this time. So better known locally for her poetry, will you please welcome to centre stage with a prose contribution to Fiction Fix Online, Kathy Ray and her dystopian speculative fiction, New Opportunities in the Gig Economy. Take it away, little Kathy.
so this is called New Job Opportunities Within the Gig Economy. String bags are the best he finds. He remembers seeing pictures of Russian grandmothers before the walls came down, always carrying a bag just in case they found something worth getting. String bags fold up small and expand exponentially to fit whatever he finds. He checks his phone, 7:45, time to get into place, time to get started. Today, as always, there's a plan, a program to follow. Outside the first supermarket, there's already a small queue. He sees a few faces he recognizes, nods a hello. These, the other professionals, are not the enemy. The other professionals support each other, share inside information, even help carry the heavier items away. It's the others, the amateurs, that cause problems. They don't follow the rules, don't accept the rationing, aren't up to date with today's government so-called guidelines. And worse than that, they wander, panic, come to unexpected halts, generally get in his way. Doors open and he's in. Doesn't need to consult the list, has already scanned the shelves as he walked past the plate glass windows, has already clocked what's in, what's not. He knows not to walk too quickly, not to look too interested, not to create any potential feeding frenzy. Interest wakes up the amateurs, and some of them are brutal. Will happily shove a less than middle-sized, middle-aged man out of the way if they think they're in danger of missing out. Today's first list is easy. Fresh fruit, all the biscuits, real coffee, dog food and dog treats. He's in and out in 15 minutes and on to the next shop. And there's always a risk here. What will he have missed with his first choice? But over the last few months, he has learned to trust his instinct, to let go of regret and to get by, always to get by. After the supermarket, he has the fiddly special commissions. These take longer, but they're the jobs that really pay. And queuing is what he does now. Not empty time, but paid and valued time. And it's a good day. The artisan baker has got hold of some gluten-free flour. It's 2 small loaves per customer, but these will go for top dollar. His only dilemma is who will actually get them. He's already texting a couple of customers before he's left the shop. Both loaves sold within seconds of them being shoved into the ever-expanding string bag. Last round of the day is the smaller corner shops. Some refuse to serve him, will only sell to their own local loyal customers, but most see him for what he is, a buyer with actual cash who will ignore a price hike and who sometimes can share useful information, give a heads up on the new forthcoming shortages, and then the deliveries. The fruit's all for one family, still looking as if they are keeping it together. The wife has plenty of makeup on, still finding someone to take care of her roots, her eyebrows, although she has taken to wearing jeans and what he thinks is called a nice top. In fairness, he's never understood clothes, was a jogging bottoms kind of guy long before they became the uniform of the stay-at-homers. The couple with the French bulldogs actually hug him when he hands them a bag of kibble. They are looking a little thinner, a little more drawn than when he saw them 2 weeks ago. He's not surprised. Dog food is holding its value. He wonders how they are managing to feed themselves. Makes a mental note that their time as customers is probably running out. He doesn't offer credit facilities. The Stoner boys, weed sellers doing well in this new world, are delighted to see him. Take all the biscuits and chocolate he has, even turn off the Xbox to talk. They're keen to get Skittles, Orange Smarties, Jelly Babies, and of course he says he will do what he can. They offer to pay in cash or kind, and after careful consideration he accepts kind. Rolls a single Skinner, smokes it slowly as he walks home, scrolling down his phone. As he thought, washing powder will be available tomorrow. He checks the almost empty bag. It's all still safe. 2 tins of dog food and a bag of chicken flavor cat treats. Reassures himself with the weight of notes and nods, pleased with the way today has gone. Who says there are no opportunities for this new world order? Thank you so much.
Okay, that was somebody spotting a little niche in the market there. Okay, so yeah, that's a really interesting take on our. Is it kind of meant to be sort of relevant to what's happening in our society today?
I think it was written in about April. We were all just queuing all the time.
Yeah.
We were thinking if we all continued queuing, and also in Russia before the walls came down, there were professional queuers who would pay. Would
Yeah.
get paid to queue for people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's, yeah, absolutely. Really interesting take.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, so our next reader then is Andrew. And like Louise, he's one of my Spalding Library learners and he writes fantasy. So let's join Andrew Dutton as he takes us Beyond the Rise, Part 1.
Okay, so this is a sort of a fantasy milieu, but it's not high fantasy with elves and dwarves, etc. I'm still world building at the moment. I kind of know what's happened and where it's going, but I haven't figured out all the stops along the way. So this is Beyond the Rise Part 1, which is intended to be the first part of the first chapter. It's as far as I've got. So, damn this rain. A relentless drizzle that reduced the world to a muted haze had been falling for days now, and he was tired of it. He allowed himself to sigh, just once, his only outward reaction to days of chilly, damp misery. He knew the weather was chosen by the gods and was not his to control. He must simply accept it. Tyro shrugged expansively, feeling a curious pleasure from the clicks and cracks as he rolled his shoulders, easing tired muscles and recovering a little lost comfort under thick layers of heavy clothing. His cloak had received several applications of rendered bear fat to make it waterproof, an essential preparation for weather like this, but it was heavy. A wide-brimmed hat kept the rain off his face and out of his eyes for the most part, and a neckerchief pulled up almost to the top of his nose protected his face from the worst of the cold. Still, he wished he'd stayed under shelter for a few days when he'd had the opportunity and waited whilst the rain abated, instead of pressing ahead with this journey, the urgency of which seemed far less important than it had then. Travelling in wet clothes has a way of changing priorities. It wasn't exactly daytime yet, but the pre-dawn hours offered just enough pale light in the grey sky to be able to keep to the trail, enough that he could just make out a plume of smoke coming from the town ahead. Not his intended destination, which was still many days' journey, but it provided a welcome break. His mind was busy making excuses to enjoy such an interlude, long enough to dry his clothes, warm his hands and feet and fill his belly, share stories with strangers and sleep in a soft bed. Such luxuries were generally frowned upon by some in his order, who fervently believed that discomfort, hunger, and isolation were essential disciplines for the intense concentration their religious and moral duties required. Indeed, they maintained it was the only true path to enlightenment, and seemed to take pleasure in seeking out hardships for themselves to endure. For Tyro, suffering was not a lens that focused him mentally or physically, and he didn't feel it brought him any closer to the gods. It was just an unnecessary distraction that risked threatening his concentration rather than reinforcing it. He used to worry this was a sign of weakness, that perhaps he wasn't suited to life in the Order of Stone. But now he realized his was simply a different approach, and arguably a stronger one, as it didn't depend on adversity to achieve his heightened state of consciousness. So he had adopted a more relaxed view towards enjoying simple comforts. And anyway, he'd also come to realize that he didn't really care what others thought. He enjoyed a little luxury every now and then, and he didn't feel any weaker for it. He'd first seen the settlement an hour ago, and despite his hunger, he chose to forego the basic breakfast of oats, nuts, and fruit prescribed as the first meal of the day by the Brotherhood. Instead, he dreamed of hot pies, sizzling bacon, succulent sausages, a selection of cheeses with warm bread, and cold, bitter ale that any half-decent roadside inn should be able to offer. He decided to save himself for the grand meal to come. Hunger had been gnawing at him for days, so he urged his man to quicken the pace a little, despite the dangers of travelling in darkness. The trails would be easy enough in the dry season, but days of light rain had turned dry, packed earth to thick, sticky mud, with puddles that hid depressions that could easily turn a horse's hoof. But Parvan was no ordinary horse. Large, powerful, and sure-footed, he'd been a gift from the Urali elders after he had negotiated a peace between them and the Kuruman. The peace had lasted these past 6 years, and whilst they may not be yet on entirely friendly terms, they certainly tolerated each other well and made an effort to learn each other's customs. The Urali had shared their knowledge of equine husbandry and hunting, and the Kuruman their superior knowledge of fishing and gathering honey. Both tribes had prospered as a result, and Parvan had become Tyro's first true friend. He allowed himself a brief smile at the memory of it. The first task the order had demanded of him after his apprenticeship was completed, one that, at the time, he'd imagined impossible to achieve. Tyro had still been young, well, certainly by the order's standards anyway, and had known little of what lay beyond the outer walls of the Brotherhood's temple. Bewildered by the world and all the people in it, he couldn't have imagined anyone less likely to succeed in such a momentous task. Back then, he didn't know himself. Experience, though, had lent him confidence, and now all things seemed possible to him. Challenging, of course. A brother of the Order of Stone would not be called upon for any simple matter, but Tyro had never found a challenge insurmountable, just another difficult step on a lifelong path of duty. Duty to the gods, duty to his brothers, duty to the king, but above all, duty to the people of Middens. This was the Brotherhood's creed, his guide in all things. His smile faded as the breeze carried an acrid note with it and his mind was brought back into focus. Parvan tossed his head, snorted, whinnied and shortened his step, also sensing the wrongness of the situation. It wasn't like him to be skittish. They drew to a halt and Tyro peered at the landscape ahead. He patted Parvan's neck firmly, soothingly, but he shared his man's concern. Something was deeply wrong. This wasn't the welcome scent of wood smoke from the cheery hearth he'd been anticipating. It was sour, yet sickly sweet, also sharp and bitter all at once. Wrong. The hairs on his neck bristled and a tingling sensation ran down his back, a primal, instinctive warning of danger. He squinted through the rain at the thick black smoke. There was far too much of it, and it appeared to have multiple sources. No, this wasn't chimney smoke. It was more substantial, more intense, and he could see now that the orange glow beneath it was not the approaching dawn. Taro felt something he was entirely unaccustomed to. Apprehension. He was unsettled. A lifetime of spiritual training allowed him to push these feelings aside and regain a sense of calm, but when he finally coaxed Pavan forward, it was at a slower, more cautious pace. Clarity is the path to understanding, he knew, and soon he would have a clearer view of what lay ahead, just beyond the rise. That's it.
Well, so let's have a big hand for Andrew and Beyond the Rise, part 1. Thank you so much for that. Okay. So right. So the time is drawing near when we have to leave you, but I have got some exciting news to bring you about my next 2 novels. I am currently working with an artist on the cover for the Zardoth Imperative Discovery. And secondly, I had a brainwave recently and I've renamed the second book. So it's now TZI, I should say, but Clanship instead of Flagship. So here are some scenes from chapters 2 and 3 of the Zardoth Imperative Clanship. Right. President Baryshnikov watched as the sun rose above the grounds around the White House. He felt as stale as 2-day-old garlic bread. He hadn't taken the break that the software engineers had suggested the previous evening while they worked on the locked computer system. He'd kept going on coffee, and the engineers had shared their pizzas, the pizzas that they'd ordered in with him. There had been little progress. That damned message still occupied every screen in the White House. Baryshnikov drives alien children to take Starship back to find parents, it read, headline style. We require 20 billion euro dollars, enough to fund a new colony on the moon. Pay up or we reveal all. You have until tomorrow. Blanco. Baryshnikov paced the room for the umpteenth time. The most notorious hacker on earth appeared to be working with the new Luddites. Whereas Per Lakshar's more personal plea by phone had apparently given his predecessor some pause for thought, this latest outrage left him in a cold fury. The worst thing was that it was true. It had been his orders that had sent Ayar Dekutz to work with his ex-foster father on the Mars run and resulted in him sneaking up to Galatea Station to take back the Starship. He was directly responsible, when he needed the ship here on Earth, for causing the Zardothi children, the only people who could help the planet, to leave along with their security chief. And he couldn't stop mentally kicking himself for such a bum move. Mr. President, sir? He turned to see Garcia, the engineer's team leader, pleading with him. We'll be a while working on this. Why not take a break? Go have some breakfast, take a shower, have a rest. You've been here all night. He conceded defeat. I will, he said, after I speak to Harris. He's downstairs, sir, Garcia said. He'll be here shortly. Omol's eyes were fixed on the image in the sim tank. When do you expect to reach the Declaney system, Vagar? Aftar asked. We'll meet you there in 2 days' time, but we've no idea what to expect when we get there. Nor do we. I'd suggest we rendezvous just outside the system so that we can review the situation and plan our strategy accordingly. Just what I was going to suggest. With a fleet of 4 clan ships, we may be able to turn this war around. 4? There'll only be us, Vagar Hesdats replied. Since you left, the fighting has broken out again. The Voth brought in more Ki forces to replace those we eliminated just as we were leaving, so Pendar and Mindar have stayed behind. Oh, I see. That means we've got to be doubly careful. We don't want to squander our forces. Afdar stood rubbing his nose for a moment, thinking hard. Then he straightened and said, "How many spare cabins do you have on board, Vagar?" About 20. Singles, doubles, dormitory places for children. You want the complete inventory? Hold for a moment, please. Vagar's image disappeared from the sim tank as he consulted something Omol couldn't see. He guessed it was a hollow image of his ship. When he reappeared, he replied, 14 singles, 9 doubles, and 5 dormitory spaces. Thanks. We've picked up Omol and his people from a desert planet, and we're just a little overcrowded here, Afdar explained. I'll reassign some of them to you so that you're up to full fighting strength again. Omol shivered. It's the beginning of the end of Clan Khazid. Bring the prisoners, the Voth High Commander grated to the squad four leader. My dyslexia there. Chabu Restik bowed low. It is done, Great One. He turned to his men, signalling the Voth's commands and how they were to be carried out. They bustled around the motley assortment of prisoners, a few Zardothi in tattered leathers and furs, many loose-robed Declanians, and even 5 of his own people. All were bound at the wrists, though not at the ankles, since they must walk wherever their captors willed. Most stared at the ground, though the Zardothi held their heads high. We will make an example of these traitors. They will not plot against us again, the Voth High Commander declared. They can either submit to the games or be publicly eliminated tomorrow. You heard that? Asked Chabu. Aye, murmured one of the Declanians, and we protest our innocence. We are not versed in the ways of war. Silence! Chabu's voice was a whiplash of sound. I will not fight in your games, said the Declani who had spoken before. I cannot speak for my companions. It's their choice, but I choose to die rather than be dishonoured by taking part in an entertainment for those who would purloin our land and kill our people. Because you know you'll lose anyway, sneered the squad leader. The Declani breathed in and the breath carried him upright. It's true that Declani are not fighters, he said. We never have been and never will be, but we have our own ways of fighting. Beware that our public executions may spark off more than you slaves. He spat the word out as a man ejects something foul-tasting from his mouth. A bargain for. Then you admit the plot? Certainly not. Chabu's hand strayed to his hip holster. I shall take great pleasure in eliminating you myself tomorrow, Vasmar, and be aware that any rebellion resulting from your execution will swiftly be put down. The Ki are totally loyal to their masters, the Voth. Come. He led the way out of the building towards the part of the compound where the prisoners would live until executed, slipping the respirator from where it was slung on his wrist to place it over his mouth and nostrils. The prisoners had no such luxury. As the harsh air with its metallic taint hit their lungs, they coughed and gasped and struggled to free their hands to clap over their own mouths and noses. At this time of day, the pollution was at its worst. Without respirators, none could breathe easily. But the atmosphere didn't seem to bother the Voth. Chabu and his men had often speculated as to whether they actually breathed at all. The tramp of his marching men and the barefoot prisoners reached him as he looked around him at the destruction the Voth had wrought. Against the skyline, a row of huge smelters belched smoke and black dust into the air. Beneath his feet, the ground was grey, and any vegetation that fought its way through the parched layer of particulates that formed the surface crust was yellow and sickly. It was just like this on Ki, he remembered, and thrust the thought from him with a physical gesture he couldn't quell. They'll rip the heart out of this planet and then move on to the next one. And for all I may try to change things, I won't be able to do a thing about it. Worse still, it wasn't any use longing for home. He had no home now. He whose firstborn brother had once been a proud leader of men with a harem of over 100 women. That pride had dissipated since the Voth occupation, when the firstborns and their wives had been turned into troop factories, and he'd been taken as a slave like all the rest of the afterborn. Many of his people were dead, and the land was worth nothing now. Everything I know is gone, if I ever go home again. Thank you so much. Okay. Right. Thank you so much for that and for listening and hopefully enjoying it. Many thanks also to all the lovely authors and readers, Colin, Martin, Kathy, Louise and Andrew for joining me. And authors, please don't forget to post the links to your books on Kindle, etc. in the chat box, which I'll put. Ooh, that's a bit big. Sorry, that it's gone really huge. I don't know why. Let me see if I can make it smaller. Oh, that's better. Right, so there it is. Ooh, it's gone smaller again. There it is, lurking over the side there, so that we can. Sorry, I'll have to get it up in a minute. Okay, I will do that. Right, so what I'll do, if you put them in the chat, I'll post them on my timeline and in the Finger on the Pulse, and also on YouTube as well. And obviously, Colin and I would like to wish all our lovely listeners, well, all of us, I think, would like to wish everybody who's listening and who joins us, even, you know, if you can come and watch the video, that's fine. And we'd like to wish you all a happy Christmas and a fab new year. And hopefully 2021 will be a bit kinder to us than 2020 was. So this has been Helen Claire Gould, comparing Fiction Fix Online. Many thanks for joining us. And the next Fiction Fix Online is on Sunday, the 3rd of January at 4 p.m. till around 5 p.m. And I look forward to catching up with you then. Thank you so much. So much.
Bye.